In the far corner of our dusty attic, there lies a box. Its wrinkled surface and faded colors, a testament to its age. When we first moved in, my wife had said it was filled with the effects of her late grandfather. She said she kept it after he died to remember him by, but I had my doubts. Late at night when she thinks that I'm asleep, I can feel her weight shift off the bed, hear her careful steps plod up the stairs, and feel the gentle rumbles of what I can only assume is the byproduct of whatever she's doing up there. At first, I thought these late-night jaunts had nothing to do with her grandfather's biological remains. Infidelity, that's what I thought. Disloyalty and unfaithfulness, I suspected. But even my wildest conjectures paled in comparison to what I now know is true. My horrific discovery was preceded by a simple premise. I would stay at home, and when my wife had gone to work, I would make my way up to that dark and dusty place. I noticed when I took my first steps into the attic that it somehow looked different. There were a few old baubles that had been moved. Christmas decorations were strewn about. Cords and tools were scattered across the floor. But that was normal and that was expected. What so intrigued me was that a cursed box of her grandfather's effects was lacking that thick layer of dust that covered everything else. It seemed I had found what my wife was preoccupying herself with. I opened the box, and inside were things that were simple in appearance, but obtuse in their meaning. Such items included an ornate kitchen knife that was as dull as a dinner plate, useless for cutting flesh or anything material. But I had a feeling, even then, that that's not what it was for. A book, a lengthy one judging by its many pages. Its contents were important, I think, for whenever I would open and read the book, as soon as I closed it again or looked away, I immediately forgot what I had just read. And finally, a small, plum-sized transparent sphere, inside of which was a flowing color. I could not accurately describe the color contained in this apparent bauble, but it defies logic and reason, and it's simultaneously like and unlike any color you have ever seen. It flowed strangely as well. Not like a breeze or water, no. It moved like a living thing. Wandering. Moving with purpose. Sometimes resting, and as I held the orb in my hand, it moved, slowly and deliberately through the confines of whatever material the orb was made of, through the air and into me. It showed me things. It showed me everything. I saw a small, poor village. In it, like a poetic verse among prosaic lines, I saw a young man, handsome, strong and intelligent. Intelligent enough to know that he was too important for the tedium that surrounded him, that threatened to smother him. His mother was a drab, shrieking hag, and his father was a menial working peasant. The young man cared little for either of them, and so, one morning he just simply left, with nothing but the clothes on his back and the dreams in his head. First was to build up his body. As he drifted from village to village, he took odd jobs. The more arduous the task, the more he relished its completion. Soon he could overpower fully grown men twice his age, and after that came the fighting. Be they brigands, terrorizing the old roads, or villagers, jealous of his looks and his sturdy build. He took them all on and was victorious every time. But then came the real fighting. His country was small and surrounded by enemies, and for its survival to be assured, it needed a strong army filled with strong men. He joined as a foot soldier, hacking and slashing with a rusty spear and an ill-fitting helmet. But soon, he was leading a group of men, ragged, ill-equipped, and ill-disciplined. But with him at the helm, they performed admirably. Soon after, higher-ups took notice and he was made into a lancer and given a fast but strong horse. Soon after that, he was leading another group of men, well-armed and heavily armored, and with a fearsome reputation. It would glide across the battlefields on their trusty steeds, spearing enemies many times their number on their weapons, which more resembled short spikes than lances. After that, well, in his mind, all that was left was to be the commander of the entire army. And so that's what he became. He led his country's army to victory more times than he could count. More times than anybody could count. But apparently, it was enough for the nobles and royalty who ran the country. In the past, one of them would be responsible for commanding the army. Upon the precipice of obliteration by its many hostile neighbors, it made the position of army commander one that the upper echelons of society found unfashionable. But they took notice of his numerous accomplishments and they paid careful attention to his growing popularity. They feared what an army led by a commoner would do if its interests ever diverged from their own. So they decided to bring him into the fold. After a particularly large and successful battle, they offered him a previously unheard of reward of being made a noble by marriage. He could choose to marry any noblewoman, provided that she was unmarried. This, they hoped, would bind him to the aristocracy at the cost of only a minor noble. But he was no fool. He had had many beautiful women, from the time when he trawled those small villages up to a successful run as a commander. No, he had his fair share of warm bodies, but what he needed was power. So he made his choice carefully. A choice that shocked all who thought he would marry a young, pretty rich girl who was the daughter or sister of some minor baron or lord. He chose an older, average-looking poor woman, who at one brief moment in time was the queen. In her younger days, she had been married to the current king, but after years without an heir, the marriage was terminated under the assumption she was barren. But he knew better. The nobility was shocked. A commoner marrying past royalty? Unthinkable and impudent. But their offer was made public and was met with much happiness and celebration, for he was popular with the people, and the people saw it was an opportunity to get someone with some merit near the reins of their country. So they agreed. And just as he suspected, it was not his wife that was unable to produce children, but her former husband, the king. The king ended up going through wives like a pig at a trough, but in the end, he went to the grave without an heir. The king had had brothers and distant relatives who were all eager to take his place, but none were as popular as he was, and none of them had an army. So it was that made him king. And finally, it seemed like what he had dreamed of when he was just a boy had come to pass. He had shown that he was much more than the human drudge that had smashed their most useful parts together to spawn him. But no matter how many feasts and parties that he threw, or how many noble ladies gave themselves to him behind their husband's back, he still felt unfilled. He needed more. He started listening to rumors that he believed possessed a kernel of truth. Tall tales that were maybe not so tall, and talk that impulsed a way to reach beyond the threshold that God had so cruelly made impervious from human tampering. Magic, witchcraft, and devilry, whatever they called it, he cared not. He sought it out in secret and interrogated all who purported to have abilities that were supernatural. Most were fraudsters, but some were genuine. So he did his best to extract from them their otherworldly knowledge. And so began his spiraling descent. He threw himself into his ungodly work and so neglected his family, his enemies, and his country. The nobles took this as their chance to strike. Under the auspices of delegating, they insisted that they place the army under the control of one of their own, and thus they engineered their downfall. For soon after this, he simply took his family and all the riches he could carry, and he up and vanished, leaving the throne deserted and a lot of power-hungry nobles happy. That happiness, in addition to the country soon turned to ash, as the neighboring took advantage of the chaos to overwhelm his poor country. He, in the meanwhile, was riding a boat to a previously unknown land. A land of savage natives, intolerable weather, religious zealots banished from their old countries, slaves, and an infinite amount of potential. His wife, the former queen, died in the voyage across the tumultuous seas, and as soon as he arrived, his daughter went off in search of anything interesting in the barbaric land, while his son focused on poetry and other arts, which left him free to pursue his own interest in various arts, the most useful of which he penned in a large book, with enchantments on it to prevent snooping. He was learning quickly while he was of considerable age. He still had the body and the vigor of a man much younger, and so he learned and he waited, emptying a native village whenever he needed sacrifices and building up his power. It was only when his guards found the body of his son, gutted and stabbed multiple times in a ditch, did he begin to realize that things were spiraling out of control. The natives were becoming restless. Too many of their own had been taken and they thirsted for savage retribution. As they closed around his opulent estate, he looked to his guards for protection, but here he also found trouble. For as the savages closed in around his compound, his guards betrayed him and they attacked him. He used his physical strength and his considerable knowledge of mystical arts to dispatch them. The effort left his guards dead and him badly wounded, but that's when his beautiful daughter appeared before him. It seemed that she had found herself something to keep busy. A barbaric, unnurtured, uncouth, and uncultured variant of his own strange powers. She had learned from the native savages a way for herself to reach beyond her means and amass otherworldly might, but their methods were crude and inefficient, and they told her that the only way she could possess a fraction of the power he could bring to bear was to make a sacrifice. But not just any sacrifice. She would have to offer to the grotesque gods the terror, fear, and the blood of her family. And now she planned to torture out of him his extensive knowledge of the supernatural before killing him in a messy and profane ritual. She was the one that had tortured and killed his son, her brother, the one that had set the natives and his guards against him. All this she revealed to him with a bright smile and a mocking intent. He tried to attack her, but he proved to be weak. He eventually escaped to his study, but only in jest. She was on her way and his injuries would soon leave him unable to resist her. So he did the only thing he could do. He used a knife taken from some long-dead mystic in the old country, and in weird gesture, he dragged the dull edge seamlessly harmlessly across his neck. Even with no wound, his wife ebbed, and his essence leaked out and stored itself in another artifact that he had picked up some years ago. When his she-devil of a daughter burst open into his study doors, she found his lifeless body, a book she couldn't read, and a small glass ball filled with indescribable colors. She carried those artifacts for years afterwards as she stayed the same, but the world around her changed continuously. She never could unlock their secrets, but that never stopped her from trying. I'm sure you figured it out by now that my suspicious spouse was, in fact, this unaging sorceress. She had continued her sacrifice of poor souls and moved from place to place to conceal her unchanging looks and dangerous intent. As much as this is a shock to me, I now find myself ruminating on another horror. Ever since I picked up that glass ball and took in those colors, I haven't been myself. I haven't felt like myself, and I haven't acted like myself. And as you can tell, I haven't been sounding like myself. I mean, I didn't have any idea what ruminating meant before today. What's happening to me? As time passes, the strange man's memories and thoughts seem more crisp and clear. I managed to read a bit more of the strange book that I found, and his ideas seem less tyrannical and more justified. And I find myself taking a personal affront to my wife's trickery. Yes, my wife. I must do something about her. I love her, but if what I saw was true, she's a murdering, awful, bad, cantankerous, traitorous wench that murdered my son and betrayed me. And at long last, I will have my revenge.